The most important thing you will ever build in your marriage is not success. It's not generational wealth. It's not even about building a stronger connection or stronger intimacy with one another, which is important. But one of the most important things you'll ever build, you'll ever create in your marriage is its culture. And in this video, we're going to explore how the culture you create in your marriage is the foundation for everything else you build in that marriage. And we're going to get into how you can shape a culture that not only strengthens your marriage, but it also nurtures it. What's up, fam? Listen, let me ask you something. Have you ever from a distance observed or even up close seen a couple interact with each other in such a way that you told yourself, yeah, the way they handle each other, I refuse to ever allow my marriage to get to that point. I refuse. The way they talk to each other, that's out. That'll never happen. But what if I told you that some of the harmful and toxic and dysfunctional interactions we sometimes see in marriages aren't always a reflection of a person's character, but rather it's the reflection of that relationship's culture? Let me give you an example. Let's say, here it is, watch. If a couple's way of communicating is filled with sarcasm, subtle jabs and jokes, constant interruptions and dismissiveness, and it goes unaddressed, it goes unchallenged, and then over time it goes unchanged, then watch this. Then over time, what once seemed to not be a big deal has now become a big deal for you two, because what has become ingrained, that dynamic, is now become the culture in your relationship. And it's a culture that says, listen, we talk to each other this way. We handle each other this way. And over time, this behavior can create unintended consequences where you start feeling, or maybe you and your partner starts feeling unheard of, disrespected, unappreciated, or even emotionally disconnected. And because this way of communicating has become the norm, you may not even realize why you feel this way, why you feel unheard and unappreciated. It's the culture. That's how important this is. And I'll go even deeper. I don't necessarily have to be a bad person to create a bad culture. Watch this. All I have to do is have some blind spots about me that I can't see and simply carry that baggage over from my past experiences or from my family of origin over right into my family of choice. And so now I handle you in such a way, destructive, whatever, dysfunctionally, in a way that now damages the relationship, not because I consciously chose that, but maybe because it was modeled before me, which in turn creates an unhealthy culture even when you didn't try to. And so when I say culture, this is what I'm essentially referring to. I'm referring to the environment the couple creates over time within that relationship or within that marriage. It's their repeated behavior, their communication style, it's their patterns, it's spoken and unspoken rules, it's their habits, it's their expectations. Those things guide and govern the way they approach and handle conflict, the way they handle each other, the way they make decisions, the way they show affection. Listen to me, right? So in other words, culture isn't just something you choose to have. It's something that naturally forms over time. Whether you're intentional about shaping it or simply letting it develop on its own, a culture will take root in your marriage. That's why it's not just imperative that we understand like what culture is, but it's also imperative that we recognize this one crucial truth, and it's this: culture is always being created whether you intentionally create it or not, which means that every habit, every reaction, every pattern, every decision, and every consistent behavior is shaping the dynamic that's being created in your relationship. And so the question becomes, is it being created by default or by design? Because fellas, as a leader, you don't have the luxury of passivity. We don't, because a leader is always called to set the tone. Remember that. Remember, whatever area you are passive in, fellas, you will suffer in. And so when we start talking about these dynamics, let's just take a minute to think through, what does it actually look like, right, for a culture to be healthy and unhealthy? What does that look like? Because if we can't recognize the difference between the two, then how can we ever hope to intentionally shape and influence an environment, a dynamic, a culture toward the kind that we want? And so watch this. So understanding this is the first step. And so when we look at a healthy marriage, when we look at a healthy culture, there's going to be some elements that we see within that culture. And so you're going to see things like this: mutual respect. You're going to see open and honest communication. You're going to see things like trust, empathy, support, forgiveness. You're going to see teamwork, shared vision, a shared values. You're going to see things like fun, healthy conflict resolution, intimacy and affection, accountability, selflessness. See, that's what you're going to see in a healthy culture. Now, what does it look like when we see an unhealthy culture? Let's look at some things. Here are some elements we're going to see. You're going to see things like disrespect, poor communication, dishonesty, distrust, a lack of empathy. You're going to see things like neglect or cynicism, criticism, unforgiveness, chronic conflict, emotional and physical withdrawal, misaligned values, selfishness, gaslighting. You're going to see all of these things and so much more. And I just really pray that I'm making myself clear. I really hope so. The environment that you create matters. It matters. And why is that? Because just like the quality and the strength of a home depends on the foundation it's built on, the quality of a marriage or a relationship is determined by the culture that supports it. You can't forget that. Watch this. Culture will either strengthen or weaken everything that's built upon it. Everything you build in that marriage. Culture is either going to weaken it or strengthen it. So if this is something that we have the power to influence and shape, which we do, then what are some things that we can begin to do to begin to influence the dynamics in the right direction? And so I want to give you a few ways that you can begin to influence your relationship and influence that culture. Number one, let's look at values. When I say values, I'm referring to what is most important to you and your partner, because values determine behavior. And so when we say values, these are things that will guide and govern how you two interact with each other. They're going to serve as a compass for your decisions, your actions, how you two will communicate and navigate challenges. And so when we talk about values, here's an example. If we talk to each other with no respect and no compassion, then watch this. It's evident that respect and compassion isn't a value of ours. Here's another one. If we can consistently see things around the house that need to be done, but we won't do anything until someone asks us to do it, then we can't say that support is a true value of ours. It's not a judgment, it's true. And you may scream from the mountaintops and say, but this and these are values of mine. And I'm going to scream back and say, listen, there is such a large difference between proclaimed values and prioritized values, that it's possible to proclaim to value something that you never actually prioritize. You got to catch that. And so you got to sit down with your partner and you got to figure out what will be the values that you two will live by in this marriage. So number one, values. Number two, we got to pay attention and look over vision. When I say vision, I'm referring to the clear picture of where you two want your marriage to go. Like what kind of marriage you and your family want to build. Like what do you two want to achieve? How do you guys want to grow in the future? And how do you envision your family and your life together? Because many people are behaving in their marriages today without any clear idea of where they want to end up tomorrow. I'm going to say it again. Many people are behaving in their marriages today without any clear idea of where they want to end up tomorrow. Man, that's crucial. And so people are communicating any kind of way. They're doing any kind of thing. They're making any kind of decisions. They're reacting any kind of way because they have not thought through where they want to end up relationally. And so you got to sit down with your partner and really think through, what is the vision that we have? What is the ultimate goal? And so number one is values. Number two is vision. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the vehicle. When I say vehicle, this is what I mean. It is the practical means by which you get yourself from here to where you want to go, right? It includes the systems, the habits, Things like routines and strategies that you two put in place that will prioritize your values, that will push you guys towards the vision, and it will reinforce that culture. Let me give you an example of a system. An example of a system could be putting in place weekly, like a monthly check-in or a weekly check-in, to have a conversation, schedule that time to meet with each other, right? So that you guys can discuss things like your goals. You can discuss things like concerns and improvements. Here's an example of a habit. A habit could be prioritizing quality time where you ensure there are specific moments during each day of uninterrupted connection, right? Here's an example of a routine. It could be you simply putting in routine date nights. This is important. And lastly, an example of strategies could be, listen, we're going to put in specific plans in place to handle things like major challenges such as what? Financial issues, family issues, etc. So when you put it all together, this is what you're going to get. The values define what matters most. The vision gives direction to those values, and the vehicle ensures that the vision turns into a reality. Basic but deep work, right? And these are three things that you can begin assessing in order to begin shaping the kind of culture that you want in your family. I really wish somebody would have told me this and taught me this. You know, I remember me and my wife were having a conversation, a check-in conversation one day, and she communicated a concern where she had with the quality and the quantity of affection that I was giving her. Now, at first, I was kind of thrown off by it. Like, okay, I thought that I was being affectionate, and I thought I was executing pretty well in this area. But the more we began to talk, the more the real issue came apparent. It wasn't that I was showing no affection at all, but what I defined as affection wasn't how she saw it. And out of a moment of honesty, she said something that I will never forget. She said something along these lines. She said, I feel like every time you show me affection, there's an expectation for sex behind it. And if I'm gonna be honest, she was right. I never said that out loud, but I had unintentionally created an expectation that said, listen, my affection wasn't always just about showing love. It often came with an unspoken request. And because of that, she started feeling pressure to perform because any sign of affection from me seemed like to her had strings attached. And at that moment, man, listen, that was a wake-up call. At that moment, I realized that the culture that was creating in my marriage, especially in the area of intimacy, wasn't just being shaped by what I said, but it was being shaped by what I consistently did. And without realizing it, I was unintentionally creating a dynamic where affection for one another was transactional. And the culture then had a domino effect in the marriage. And so instead of bringing us closer, it was slowly creating distance between me and her. Why? Because now she was avoiding being affectionate with me. Altogether, because why? Because she didn't want her affection and her response to my affection to send a mixed signal that said, hey, I want to engage in sex. And so when in reality, she just wanted to engage in affection through normal means. And so now this culture that I was creating unintentionally was now working against us. It was working against us. And so I want to wrap it up. But before we go, I want to kind of just go over what we learned from here. So number one, the first thing we learned is that culture matters because the quality of anything you build in your marriage or your relationship depends on the quality of that culture. The second thing we learned is that culture is always being created, whether it's created by default or by design. And the last thing we learned is that if you want to shape the kind of culture that you want to see in your marriage, then you have to assess your values, your vision, and your vehicle, right? The vehicle, which are the means by which gets you from where you are to where you want to be. And so here's my challenge to you, married men. What is one habit you need to commit yourself to changing that will improve your marriage culture? I want you to drop that in the comments, share it. And for the engaged and for the dating men, what kind of culture do you want to build from the start? I told you, I really wish somebody would have sat down and taught me that and told me that. But I'm telling you, because I want to give you speed. I want to help you not bump your head. And so as always, man, listen, I pray that this stretches you. I pray that it was helpful. And if it was helpful in any way, I ask that you share it. Hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe so that you can see all of the content that I create each week. And listen, share it to somebody who needs it. Why? Because as men, we are called to lead our homes. And every great leader must know the importance of understanding and creating a healthy culture. Until next time, peace.